The sun was just rising over the quiet farmland, spilling warm light over the neat rows of crops. Birds chirped, and the soft hum of insects filled the air. The farm looked peaceful, almost too peaceful for what was about to unfold. The woman who owned it moved with practiced calm, carrying buckets of feed for the animals. She was a single mother, raising her young daughter alone, and this land was more than just a home. It was everything she had worked for. People who drove past the farm often underestimated her. They saw a woman in jeans and boots, a straw hat tilted slightly on her head, tending to the chickens and goats. They never guessed the history behind her calm eyes. She had once served in the military, trained in ways most people could not even imagine. She had been a sniper, a Green Beret, and her skills had saved lives in faraway lands. But those days were behind her. Now she lived for simple things: her farm, her daughter, and the quiet satisfaction of a life she built with her own hands. That morning started like any other, but there was an unusual tension in the air, though she didn't notice it yet. From the edge of the nearby woods, a group of men had been watching for days. They were young, reckless, and desperate. Rumors of an easy target had reached them, a woman alone with a small farm that seemed isolated and vulnerable. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Inside the farmhouse, the woman moved with efficiency. Breakfast was simple but nourishing. Eggs from the chickens, fresh bread, coffee strong enough to wake the sleepiest of souls. Her daughter sat at the table, yawning and rubbing her eyes. The child's laughter and chatter filled the room with warmth. It was the kind of sound that made the woman's heart swell with pride and protectiveness. After breakfast, the woman stepped outside to check on the fields. The morning sun cast long shadows across the soil, and the wind carried the faint scent of earth and growing plants. She inspected the crops, making notes in her small notebook. Farming was hard work, but it had a rhythm, a pattern she had come to love. It gave her control, a sense of peace that the military never had. Yet she remained alert as any veteran would. Her senses were always tuned, her instincts sharp. Meanwhile, the gang was planning their move. They parked their beat-up truck a mile away, whispering and laughing, thinking about the easy score ahead. They imagined a few quick hours taking whatever they wanted and leaving without consequence. None of them had ever seen a woman like the one on that farm. None of them knew what she could do. As the woman worked in the fields, she felt something, a subtle shift in the air, the faint sound of a vehicle on the gravel road beyond the trees. She paused, squinting toward the horizon. Her military training kicked in automatically. She didn't panic, but her body tightened, her mind cataloging everything: how many people, how they moved, the sound of the tires, the distance. Everything was noted silently, efficiently. She walked back toward the house, calling her daughter inside. "Come on, let's get ready for the day," she said casually. Her tone was calm, but there was an edge to it. She locked the doors behind them, checking the windows. Most people would have thought it was just routine, but she knew better. Something felt wrong. The gang, unaware that their target was far from defenseless, approached cautiously. They parked a little closer, thinking they were just scouting. They joked among themselves, making plans about how to scare the woman into giving them what they wanted. They didn't realize that the farm had more than just fences and gates. They were walking into the territory of someone who had survived danger most people couldn't even imagine. Inside, the woman began her quiet preparations. She didn't reach for weapons, at least not in the way one might expect. She moved with deliberate calm, checking the house, making sure everything was secure. Her mind was a step ahead, calculating, planning. She remembered her training, the hours spent in harsh conditions, the patience required to watch, wait, and act with precision. She knew she didn't have to confront them immediately. She had time, advantage, and knowledge they lacked entirely. Her daughter played quietly in the corner, oblivious to the tension creeping into the farmhouse. The mother watched her for a moment, her heart aching at the thought of anyone threatening this peace. She knew that protecting her child was no longer just a choice, it was a necessity. Every lesson she had learned in the military, every challenge she had faced, every moment of danger had prepared her for this. Outside, the gang continued to make their way toward the farmhouse. They were confident, talking loudly, trying to mask the nervousness that came with their first serious attempt at crime. Their laughter bounced across the fields, mixing with the morning sounds of the farm. To them, this was all part of the adventure, a way to prove themselves. They had no idea that the adventure would turn against them in ways they couldn't imagine. The woman stepped back outside, watching the tree line. She didn't move hastily or make any sudden gestures. She simply observed, letting the wind carry the sounds to her trained ears. She could hear the crunch of the gravel, the faint rustle of clothing, the voices disguised by distance. She counted, calculated, and waited. Patience was one of her greatest tools, and she intended to use it. As the morning sun climbed higher, the farm seemed to glow with ordinary life. Chickens clucked, the goats bleated, and the crops swayed gently in the breeze. Yet, beneath the calm surface, tension built like a storm about to break. The gang, still oblivious, drew closer, each step taking them deeper into territory they did not understand. The woman made one last check of the perimeter, then returned inside. She picked up a simple object, a tool from her old life, and examined it. To an outsider, it might seem mundane. To her, it was a lifeline, a symbol of readiness. She wasn't planning violence for its own sake. She was planning protection, and she was good at it, better than anyone else around, without question. Her daughter wandered closer, curious about her mother's actions. "Mom, are we going to have visitors?" she asked, her small voice full of innocence. The woman smiled briefly, bending down to ruffle her hair. "Maybe, sweetie. Maybe?" she said softly, masking the seriousness with a calm tone. She didn't want to alarm her child unnecessarily. By now, the gang had reached the fence line, moving quietly, thinking the woman might be distracted or unaware. They whispered plans, imagining her as weak, imagining themselves in control. They didn't notice the subtle signs, the carefully placed tools, the quiet alertness of the farm, the unnatural stillness that seemed to follow her movements. The first real encounter was about to happen, though no one realized it yet. The woman stayed inside just long enough to ensure her daughter was safe, then moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had faced far greater threats than a group of desperate criminals. She didn't hurry. She didn't panic. She simply prepared, knowing that every step she took now was measured, deliberate, and crucial. The stage was set for a confrontation that neither side would forget. The farm, which had been a place of peace and routine, was about to become a battlefield of wits, skill, and instinct. And the gang, overconfident and unprepared, were about to learn the hard truth. Appearances could be deceiving, and underestimating someone could be the biggest mistake of their lives. The morning stretched on, and the farm seemed to hold its breath. The woman moved carefully through the house, checking locks and quietly gathering supplies that might be needed. To anyone looking from the outside, it seemed like ordinary farm work, but she knew better. Every sense was alive, every instinct ready. She had faced far worse, and she had learned to trust the quiet warnings that her body gave her. Outside, the gang crept closer, crouching behind the thick bushes at the edge of the property. They were confident in their plan, whispering to each other about how easy it would be to take control of the farm. One of them kicked a small rock, sending it skittering across the gravel. The sound might have seemed small, insignificant, but the woman heard it instantly. She froze for a moment, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. Her mind raced, cataloging the number of people, their positions, and their likely intentions. She didn't panic. She never did. Years of training had taught her patience and control. Every movement, every sound was important. She knew she could wait, observe, and let them make the first mistake. And mistake they would. The gang slowly made their way along the fence line, thinking they were stealthy. They whispered and nudged each other, trying not to laugh too loudly. One of them even tried to throw a glance at the farmhouse window, imagining the woman sitting inside, unaware of them. They had no idea that she was not only aware but fully prepared. Inside the house, she gathered a few items, a flashlight, some old tools, a pair of binoculars she had used for bird watching, but had once relied on for far more serious purposes. She moved with quiet efficiency, checking every angle. She could feel her heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. Calmness was her strength. Panic would be weakness. The gang reached the back of the property where a small barn stood. They thought it would be a good place to hide and plan their entry. As they approached, one of them tripped on a low ose board, sending a loud creak echoing through the quiet morning. The woman stiffened, listening carefully. Every sound told a story. She knew how many were there, their approximate positions, and even the way they moved. She stepped outside quietly, keeping the barn between her and the men. She moved slowly, deliberately, letting the warm sunlight fall across her face, making it seem as if she was unaware. But inside, her mind was racing, mapping every detail. She remembered old drills, Old training exercises and the countless times she had had to wait for the perfect moment. This was not her first test of patience. The gang began to make noise, laughing and talking loudly about how easy this would be. One of them pulled out a crowbar, thinking to use it on the barn door. They had no idea that the barn itself was part of her plan. Every structure on the farm was chosen carefully, every detail considered. They were walking into a trap, but they didn't know it. The woman waited until the perfect moment. She stepped back inside the house, gathering her daughter quietly. She spoke softly, her tone calm and soothing. "Stay here. Don't make a sound. Just stay right here." Her daughter nodded, trusting her completely. Children have a remarkable ability to sense when their parent is in control. She knew there was danger, but she felt safe because her mother's calm presence was unshakable. Outside, the gang tried the barn door, forcing it open with brute strength. They pushed and pulled, laughing at what they thought was resistance from a weak structure. The woman watched from a distance unseen. She had left a few subtle signs, small obstacles that slowed them down just enough to give her control. Their overconfidence was their undoing. She moved silently to her vantage point behind a hill on the property. From here she could see everything. Every movement, every mistake, every whisper of the gang was visible. She didn't need to rush. She could control the situation simply by waiting and letting them reveal themselves. The gang, frustrated by the barn door, began to shout. "She's probably hiding somewhere inside," one of them yelled. Another laughed nervously, trying to maintain courage. They were beginning to feel the first real stirrings of doubt. They didn't know why, but something about the farm seemed too quiet, too controlled. The woman adjusted her position, keeping her movements minimal. She knew that any sudden motion might give her away. Patience was her weapon, and she had plenty of it. The gang, in their impatience, made the next mistake. One of them leaned too far over a fence, trying to get a better look. Another stepped on a brittle branch, snapping it loudly underfoot. Every noise gave her more information. She now had a mental map of their positions, their weaknesses, and their likely reactions. Back inside the house, she kept her daughter calm. She spoke softly, asking about school, about friends, about small everyday things. This kept her daughter distracted, unaware of the looming danger while the mother prepared for what might come next. Her focus was total, a blend of strategy and instinct honed over years in the military. Outside, the gang finally decided to move closer to the farmhouse. They thought that surprise would help them. They had no idea that the surprise was coming from the other side. The woman had already set up small deterrents, simple things that would confuse and disorient the intruders. Nothing dangerous yet, but enough to make them question their choices. One of the men tried to open a side gate. It creaked loudly and the sound carried across the fields. The woman moved slightly, just enough to see the reflection of the morning sun on a metal object he carried. She recognized it immediately. It was nothing serious, just a tool for entry. But to her trained eyes, it revealed everything she needed to know. She smiled faintly, not out of joy, but because she recognized the predictability of human behavior. She had seen this pattern before countless times: overconfidence, lack of awareness, and the inevitable mistakes that followed. The gang thought they were clever. They were not. The woman decided it was time to escalate, but carefully. She needed to make her presence known without putting herself or her daughter in danger. She found a vantage point on the porch, visible but protected, and made a small, deliberate noise. A hammer tapped lightly against wood, just enough to draw attention. The gang froze. Their eyes searched for movement. They whispered nervously, unsure if anyone was inside. "Did you hear that?" one asked. The others nodded, tension creeping into their voices. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected awareness. They thought they were in control. The woman stayed calm, letting them stew in uncertainty. This was the first taste of the challenge she would present. She wasn't planning to fight them immediately. She was planning to show that she was not to be underestimated. She let the silence stretch, letting them imagine the worst. The gang began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to push forward. Others wanted to retreat. Their unity, fragile at best, was cracking under pressure. Each small sound from the farmhouse, each subtle movement they noticed, made them second-guess themselves. The woman watched quietly, analyzing their weaknesses. She knew that confrontation might be unavoidable, but for now, patience and strategy, were her allies. She moved back inside, ensuring her daughter was still safe, still calm. The child played quietly, unaware of the danger, trusting her mother completely. The gang, frustrated and growing more reckless, made their next move. They tried a different approach, circling around the back of the house. They were no longer organized. They were now reacting to fear, uncertainty, and the unknown. Every step they took made them more vulnerable, though they had no idea. From her hidden vantage points, the woman noted everything. Every step, every glance, every whisper was catalogued. She had anticipated their actions, and she had prepared subtle defenses. She wasn't about to use brute force yet. She was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The tension built, the quiet farm now alive with the anticipation of the inevitable confrontation. The gang had made their first mistakes. They were showing fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The woman, calm and composed, readied herself for the next stage, knowing that every decision she made now would determine the outcome, and so, the morning stretched on, the sun climbing higher, the birds continuing their songs, and the small farm standing as a silent battlefield. The gang, overconfident and unaware, had walked into a situation they did not understand. The woman, patient and prepared, held all the power, ready to show that appearances could be deadly deceiving. By late morning, the sun hung high, spilling bright light across the farm. What had been peaceful just hours ago now felt tense, like the calm before a storm. The gang had moved closer, still underestimating the woman's awareness and skill. Every step they took, every whisper of movement was observed, catalogued, and anticipated. The woman stayed inside, keeping her daughter calm. She spoke softly about small things, a new book, the garden, a bird they could see from the window, while her mind worked rapidly. She needed to protect her daughter, secure the property, and handle the intruders with precision. She had trained for situations far worse than this. But the stakes felt higher now because her child's safety was at risk. Outside, the gang split into two groups, thinking that dividing their forces would make it easier to surround the farmhouse. One group moved along the side of the house, the other stayed near the barn, whispering about what to do next. They were reckless and overconfident. Each small noise they made, each careless movement, revealed more about their positions and intentions. The woman picked up a pair of binoculars, scanning the field with sharp eyes. She could see the tension in their postures, the fear starting to creep in beneath their bravado. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when hesitation and doubt began to weaken them. She didn't need to rush. Her patience was an advantage. One of the gang members approached the side of the house, thinking he could peer inside unnoticed. The woman moved quietly to another vantage point behind the porch, her figure hidden in the shadows. She observed every angle. She knew how to make her presence felt without putting herself in danger. She picked up a tool, a long, sturdy piece of metal, and tapped it lightly against the railing. The sound was small but deliberate. The man froze, his head turning sharply toward the noise. His friends called to him, whispering nervously, trying to make sense of what they heard. The woman smiled faintly. They had no idea how well she had read them, no idea that their own mistakes were working against them. The group near the barn tried to move closer, hoping to flank the house. One of them stepped on a hidden board, which creaked loudly under his weight. The other group flinched at the sound, realizing that they weren't as unnoticed as they thought. Panic began to creep in, and with panic came mistakes. Inside the house, the woman moved her daughter to a safer spot, away from any windows or doors. "Stay here, sweetie. Don't move," she said quietly. Her daughter obeyed, trusting completely in her mother's calm authority. The child didn't need to understand the danger, only to feel the protection her mother provided. The gang grew bolder, or perhaps more desperate. One of them tried to open a window at the back of the house, thinking it would give them an advantage. The woman's eyes narrowed as she watched from her vantage point. She didn't panic. She didn't shout. Instead, she waited. Every second that passed increased her understanding of their weaknesses and fears. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the barn. One of the men had tripped over a stack of old crates, sending them tumbling to the ground. The noise echoed across the property, startling the other gang members. Their confidence began to crumble. Some whispered to each other, suggesting retreat, but none dared act immediately. They were trapped in their own fear, just as the woman had intended. She stepped outside briefly, appearing calm and unthreatened. Her presence alone was enough to make the gang hesitate. They didn't know her history, didn't know what she was capable of. To them, she looked like a simple farm woman tending her property. That illusion was about to shatter. One of the men shouted, "Hey, step away from the house." His voice was forced, shaky. The others followed with threats, trying to appear confident. The woman didn't respond verbally. Instead, she moved with deliberate precision, adjusting her position to make it seem as though she had full control of the property. From her position, she triggered a few small distractions. A bucket tipped over near the edge of the porch, clanging loudly. A goat bleated unexpectedly from the barn. Each sound made the gang jump, misjudge distances, and step into positions that revealed themselves to her trained eyes. She cataloged each movement silently, mentally preparing for the next step. The gang, growing frustrated, decided to split even further. One of them tried to circle the house completely, moving toward a side that seemed less guarded. Another approached the front porch, thinking they could intimidate her into compliance. They were wrong. Every move they made was predictable, and she anticipated each one. Inside, she kept her daughter calm, whispering softly about the morning chores, about how the chickens would eat their breakfast, about the sunlight warming the fields. Her daughter giggled quietly, completely unaware of the danger outside. The mother's calm presence was a shield, keeping fear away from the child while she assessed every threat. The gang's first real mistake came when one of them tried to climb onto the porch to get a closer look. The woman had prepared for this. She used a long metal rod to create a subtle noise from above, startling the man just enough to throw him off balance. He stumbled and fell backward onto the grass, scraping his knee. The others froze, realizing that their approach was not going as planned. Fear began to replace their earlier confidence. They whispered nervously, questioning each other's decisions. "Maybe we should leave," one said quietly. Another shook his head, trying to appear brave. But the cracks in their unity were clear. The woman observed silently, recognizing that her strategy of patience was working. They were panicking without realizing why. She didn't move aggressively yet. Instead, she stayed calm, using small, deliberate actions to unsettle them further. A creak of the porch floor, the sudden bleat of a goat, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Each sound was calculated to make them second-guess themselves. She was in full control, and they didn't even know it. The gang's group near the barn decided to move forward, thinking the side of the house was less defended. One of them kicked a crate, which toppled over and clanged against the barn wall. The sound echoed, revealing their position clearly. The woman noted it instantly, adjusting her plan. She didn't need to see them directly to know where they were and how they were moving. The first confrontation was about to escalate. The gang had shown enough recklessness to put themselves at risk. The woman's patience, training, and awareness had allowed her to observe, plan, and prepare for the right moment. She wasn't going to act with unnecessary force. She was going to act with precision. From a hidden spot near the porch, she moved slowly, deliberately placing herself in a position where she could see both groups of intruders. Her movements were calm, controlled, and deliberate. She made no sudden gestures, but her presence alone was enough to unsettle the gang. They felt eyes on them, though they couldn't see anyone clearly. One of the men tried to reach the front door, thinking that confrontation would intimidate her. She waited until he was halfway across the yard, then used a simple but effective tactic. She knocked a metal bucket over, sending it clanging to the ground. The man jumped, stumbled, and fell face first into the dirt. The others shouted in alarm, realizing that their plan was falling apart. Panic spread quickly among the gang. Their confidence evaporated, replaced by fear and uncertainty. They tried to regroup, but the woman had already analyzed their positions, predicted their reactions, and prepared for the next moves. She was not only ready to defend herself, but also to make it clear that this farm was not a place for fools to trespass. She stayed calm, speaking only when necessary. "Leave now and no one gets hurt," she said, her voice steady and authoritative. The gang froze. They had expected a frightened woman, not a confident, controlled presence. Her words carried weight. They realized they had underestimated her in every possible way. Inside, her daughter looked up at her with innocent curiosity. "Mom, did they leave?" she asked quietly. The woman smiled faintly, keeping her tone calm. "Not yet, sweetie. But everything's okay. We're safe," she meant it. Her skills, her patience, and her strategy had given them the advantage. She had the situation under control. The gang argued among themselves, some wanting to retreat, others too stubborn to admit defeat. Their confusion and fear were visible to the woman, who remained poised, ready to act if needed. Every second passed and the advantage grew. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She simply let their own mistakes and fear work against them. The first real encounter had begun, though no one had yet been seriously harmed. The gang had realized too late that this was not a simple target. The woman's skill, patience, and awareness were proving overwhelming. They had made their first mistakes and she was using them to control the situation. By now it was clear that the balance of power had shifted. The gang was disorganized, fearful, and unsure. The woman remained calm, observing, adjusting, and preparing for the next step. Her training as a former Green Beret sniper had taught her that patience, strategy, and awareness could overcome even the most dangerous situations. This was proving true again on her own farm. The stage was set for the confrontation that would decide the outcome. The gang had underestimated her and they were paying for it. The woman, calm and precise, was ready to take control fully, showing that appearances could be deadly deceiving. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the farm. The air, once filled with the normal sounds of birds and wind, now held a tense stillness. The gang had been rattled for hours, their confidence shattered by a woman they had completely underestimated. Each misstep, each small distraction had worked against them, leaving them fearful, frustrated, and disorganized. From the porch, the woman watched quietly. She didn't need to shout or confront them aggressively. Her calm presence alone was enough to control the situation. She could see their scattered positions, the hesitations in their movements, and the unmistakable signs of panic. Each detail confirmed that she had turned a potentially dangerous situation into one entirely under her control. Inside the house, she checked on her daughter. The child was playing quietly, still unaware of the drama unfolding outside. The woman smiled faintly, her heart swelling with relief. This was what she had fought for. Not the thrill of confrontation, but the safety of her child, the preservation of her home, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that skill, patience, and strategy could triumph over recklessness and aggression. The gang, now clearly demoralized, began to argue once more. Some wanted to retreat immediately, their nerves frayed beyond reason. Others, too proud to admit defeat, suggested desperate maneuvers to salvage their plan. But the cracks in their unity were clear. Fear had replaced confidence and hesitation had replaced action. Every choice they made now only worsened their situation. The woman decided it was time to escalate to the final stage. She didn't need weapons, not yet. She only needed to show that she could take precise action if necessary, and that she was fully aware of every movement on the property. She stepped lightly to the edge of the porch and made a deliberate sound, a small kick against a metal bucket. The clang echoed across the yard, startling the gang and making them freeze in place. Their fear was palpable. One of them shouted angrily, but the voice was shaky, betraying his own panic. "We need to get out of here." Another tried to rally him, but the fear was infectious. The gang had realized too late that their plan had failed completely. They were no longer confident intruders. They were desperate, trapped by their own mistakes and the woman's careful control. From her vantage point, the woman began guiding them with subtle actions. She tipped another bucket, causing it to roll across the yard. A goat bleated loudly, and a loose branch snapped under the wind, all timed to make the gang question their surroundings. They began to move in confusion, unsure where to go, what to do, or how many people were actually present. One of the men attempted to reach the side gate, thinking he could escape unnoticed. He tripped over a hidden object, falling hard into the dirt. The others froze, hearing the crash, unsure how to respond. Panic surged among them. Their overconfidence, the very thing that had brought them here, was now completely gone. The woman remained calm, her breathing steady, her eyes scanning the property. She had anticipated every possible move, and now she watched as their mistakes sealed their fate. She did not shout or threaten unnecessarily. She only needed to maintain her presence and continue guiding them into a state of controlled fear. She then made her final move, simple, yet decisive. She stepped fully into view, standing firmly on the porch. The gang could see her clearly now. Her posture was confident, her gaze unwavering, and her presence commanding. They had never imagined that the woman they had targeted was not only aware of them, but completely in control. The effect was immediate. The gang froze, unsure whether to advance, retreat, or flee. Their coordination had evaporated, replaced by fear and indecision. They could see that she was not intimidated by them in the slightest. Every second they hesitated, the realization sank deeper. They had chosen the wrong target. Inside, the woman's daughter looked up with innocent curiosity. "Mom, are they leaving now?" she asked quietly. The woman smiled, bending down to ruffle her hair. "Soon, sweetie. Everything's going to be fine." The reassurance in her voice was genuine. She had the situation fully in hand and the child's safety was guaranteed. The gang, now desperate, attempted to regroup near the barn. They whispered urgently, trying to come up with a plan, but each suggestion was met with hesitation and doubt. Their fear had overtaken their reasoning. The woman, watching carefully, knew that this was the point where their disorganization could be finalized without the need for unnecessary violence. She used subtle, calculated distractions to push them further. A rock clattered across the yard, a branch fell from a tree, and the goats moved noisily through the barn. Each sound made the gang jump, stumble, and question their decisions. They could not understand what they were dealing with. To them, the farm seemed alive with unseen forces, each one more dangerous than the last. One of the gang members finally shouted, "We can't do this. Let's go." The others hesitated, but the fear in their eyes was clear. Their unity had collapsed entirely. They were no longer in control, and they understood instinctively that continuing would only bring humiliation or worse. The woman stayed calm, maintaining her presence but taking no aggressive action yet. She had already won. The gang had been broken by their own mistakes, their overconfidence, and her patience and strategy. She only needed to guide them toward the exit, letting them leave without confrontation but with the understanding that they had been thoroughly outmatched. Slowly, the gang began to retreat. Some ran toward the fence, stumbling over the uneven ground. Others moved cautiously, glancing nervously at the farmhouse. Every step was dictated by fear, every glance a reminder that they had chosen the wrong target. The woman watched silently, ensuring that no one attempted to return or regain any sense of control. Once the gang had moved beyond the edge of the property, the woman took a deep breath and finally allowed herself to relax. The immediate threat was gone. Her daughter remained calm, unaware of the danger they had narrowly avoided. The relief was immense, but it was tempered by the realization that vigilance would always be necessary. Life could change in an instant, and the woman had learned long ago that preparation and awareness were vital. She stepped outside fully, walking slowly across the yard. The farm, once tense with uncertainty, now returned to its normal rhythm. The chickens clucked, the goats wandered, and the soft rustle of the wind in the crops reminded her that the world could still be peaceful. She felt the weight of the day lift, replaced by a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had protected her home, her child, and herself without unnecessary confrontation or harm. Her daughter followed her outside, curious about the returning calm. "Mom, are they gone for good?" she asked, eyes wide. The woman smiled warmly, taking her hand. "Yes, sweetie. They won't be coming back. We're safe now." Her words carried authority, reassurance, and love all at once. The child's trust in her mother had been affirmed, and that trust was more valuable than anything else in the world. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The farm glowed in the warm light, a symbol of safety and resilience. The woman moved through the yard, checking the animals, inspecting the property, and ensuring that everything was as it should be. Every detail mattered, every precaution was confirmed. She had faced a challenge that could have been dangerous, and she had emerged in full control. The gang, meanwhile, disappeared down the distant road, their confidence shattered, their pride bruised, and their overconfidence thoroughly punished. They would remember this day not with triumph but with a lesson in humility and caution. They had underestimated someone they could never have anticipated, a single mother, calm, intelligent, and capable, defending what mattered most. As night fell, the farm returned to its natural rhythm. The stars appeared one by one, and the cool night air replaced the heat of the day. The woman and her daughter sat on the porch quietly enjoying the calm. No words were necessary. The silence itself was a comfort, a reminder that danger had passed and safety had been preserved. The woman reflected on the day, on her actions, and on her instincts. She had faced a threat with patience, strategy, and calm authority. She had protected her child without reckless force, had controlled the situation entirely, and had ensured that the gang learned a lesson without escalating to unnecessary violence. Her training, experience, and intuition had been the keys to success. Her daughter leaned against her, tired but content. "Mom, we're really safe now, right?" The woman nodded, holding her close. "Yes, sweetie. We're safe. Always." That promise and the truth behind it was all that mattered. The farm, under the quiet night sky, seemed to breathe again. The field swayed gently in the breeze, the animals settled for the night, and the house stood strong and secure. The woman knew that threats could come again, but she also knew that she had the skill, the patience, and the presence of mind to face them. She had proven it today, and she would continue to protect what mattered most: her home, her farm, and her child. The night passed peacefully. No sounds of intruders disturbed the quiet. Only the soft hum of nature reminded them that life could continue, calm and safe. The woman felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had faced danger, controlled the situation, and preserved the peace of her home and family. By morning, the events of the day would fade into memory, but the lessons would remain. The gang had learned that appearances could be deceiving, that overconfidence was dangerous, and that true skill, patience, and strategy could not be underestimated. The woman had demonstrated that control and calm could achieve what aggression and recklessness never could. As dawn broke on a new day, the farm returned fully to its rhythm. The sun rose, the animals stirred, and the crops swayed gently in the morning breeze. The woman and her daughter moved through the yard, checking the fields and caring for the animals. Life once again felt safe, predictable, and peaceful. The threat was gone. The gang had fled. The woman had protected her home and her child. And in that quiet victory, she felt something deeper, a profound sense of confidence and reassurance that no matter what challenges might come, she could face them, and she would always protect what mattered most. The farm stood as a symbol of resilience, safety, and calm authority. The woman had faced danger, controlled the situation with skill and patience, and emerged victorious without unnecessary confrontation. Her child's safety, the farm's security, and her own peace of mind had been preserved, and as the sun climbed higher, she smiled, knowing that her home and her life was once again secure.